Comedy is constantly evolving. If it didn't, audiences would still be losing their minds over pie throwing. As comedy evolves, what is and isn't funny changes, which makes sense. Topics stop being relevant, material gets stale, or audiences just don't have the stomach for it anymore. One of the latest topics being reevaluated is how racism is portrayed in comedies. Several prominent series have had episodes pulled from streaming services, viewer discretion warnings play in front of the Muppets, and the public backlash is even greater. But is that right? Can racism ever be funny? I guess if you want a simple answer, then yes, if it makes you laugh. But this might need more than a simple answer. One of the most juvenile types of humor is shock. It's saying random, extreme things at inappropriate times in hopes that the listeners are so unprepared that it induces laughter. It's basically any Call of Duty lobby, but even if yelling some obscene statement or observation may generate a few awkward snickers, it's not a joke. There's no setup punchline, it's just shock. Contrast this with, say, Matt Stone and Trey Parker of South Park. They say and depict highly offensive content and avoid controversy because it's clever and funny. It takes a special person to approach sensitive topics in a way that makes people feel good instead of riled up. But it takes more than just being clever and funny to make racism and comedy work. Think Family Guy and its cutaways. They're sometimes the funniest parts of an episode, but do nothing for the overall plot. Both Family Guy and South Park want to make people laugh, but the characters in South Park typically have a reason behind their words and actions, where Family Guy is just joke after joke. And the South Park characters who regularly engage in hateful thoughts aren't portrayed in the most positive light. People shouldn't aspire to be Eric Cartman or Mr. Garrison. And there's a reason why newer Family Guy seasons shy away from racist humor, and that's because it shouldn't be carelessly used, even if it has good intentions. And not all of Seth MacFarlane's comedies suffer from the same pitfalls as Family Guy. American Dad and Family Guy share a similar number of racy jokes. However, the big difference between the two is how the humor is utilized. When Peter Griffin utters some racist remark, it's followed by some stupid punchline.
A black and a white talking as if it's normal.
But for Stan Smith, it usually illustrates his ignorance. Meaning, American Dad's racism highlights Stan's growth. He's come a long way since imprisoning the Mumaris and kidnapping that baby of a gay couple. Even if Stan spouted some hateful lines, the audience got to laugh at Stan and he got to grow. Unlike Family Guy, where everything is just nonsense, it seems like the tolerance for casual racism in comedies is rapidly depleting. Just look at what happened to Velma, a show that followed that make fun of everyone, no topic was off limits philosophy so prevalent just a decade ago. Sure, Velma had some other issues that I covered in a previous video, but I was always thrown off when people accused it of being racist. Yes, there are a lot of jokes at Indian people's expense, but Mindy Kaling, an Indian comedian, is one of the lead creatives. Velma might be a bad example of what is and is not permissible in comedy since the internet reacted like it was responsible for 9/11. There's been other shows created by minorities that poke fun at themselves. There's Fresh Off the Boat with many lighthearted, funny stories that center around stereotypes like the Chinese being bad drivers or the Chinese being cheap.
He'd already paid for the fare.
Oh, so Chinese.
Disappointing.
But no one complains since it's never really presented in a hateful way and the humor is more self-deprecating than anything else. Almost the complete opposite of the Boondocks. I don't even think I can play a clip from the Boondocks without being banished to the Shadow Realm by YouTube. We have episodes that depict black men engaging in violence over pointless conflicts, Martin Luther King Jr. scolding black Americans, and a black man desperately trying to hide his blackness in order to appease his white community. And those aspects alone might be forgivable, but then there's Uncle Ruckus, and what can we say about Uncle Ruckus? Uncle Ruckus is quick to share his thoughts on how he feels about anyone who's not white, with no uncertain words.
If Michelangelo had been black, Jesus would look like George Jefferson.
And it doesn't matter how awful the things he says is, I can't help myself laughing at some of his lines due to the sheer ridiculousness of it. In a way, it's the shock value that we discussed earlier, but the big difference is that Uncle Ruckus is an antagonist in an adult animated comedy meant to act as the Freeman family foil. But really, it's important that comedies and other forms of media include racism because it exists whether or not characters like Uncle Ruckus appears on TV or not. We don't think about these same restrictions with other social ills such as poverty and violence. The only topic that recently became seriously off limits comedically is sexual assault, which I think is the right choice, but that's a topic for a different video. You might argue that comedy should just be a chance to laugh and they shouldn't deal with volatile issues, but comedy might be one of the first ways societies start having complex conversations. Ignoring serious issues don't make them disappear. Racism exists throughout the world, and depending on the time and location, the prevalence varies. If there's a movie set out west in the 1800s, I'd suspect Black, Asian, or Native American characters to be treated unfairly. I'm not talking 12 Years a Slave badly, but Seth MacFarlane's A Million Ways to Die in the West walked this line perfectly by depicting some common racist tropes of the time in such an extreme fashion. So yes, racism in comedy can still be funny, and it's not just reserved for creators of color, but creators should still be mindful of how racism is presented in comedies.